After Confucius died, rumor has it that his house was untouched. His head is still hung in the same place. All his teachings, books were there. Nobody touched them. And people said they still heard this calm voice sometimes through the wind of teaching wisely, his voice. They still hear the beautiful music that he played and his students reciting poetry. It fills the air. And then one day in 256 BC, he died in 479 BC. In 256 BC, the dukedom of Lu was overrun by Chor, a very powerful kingdom. And they overran them, but even Chor, for all their supposedly savagery, when they overran the Lu kingdom, they looked at Confucius' house, they saluted, they never touched it, left it intact. Then came 221 BC, Chen Ji Wang came into power. His million troops swept throughout the country. They swept Chor out and took over the former Lu, and they were giving express instructions to burn the house down. So they burned everything they could. And for a year, there's this huge silence in that place. And after a year, apparently the music came back. His voice was heard again. And people felt his presence there. In fact, Confucius was probably the most decorated person in Chinese history after his death. And during the Han Dynasty, subsequent emperors began to embrace his teachings and made it the official educational material. In fact, if you wanted to become an officer, you wanted to be a government official, you had to sit the Confucianist exams. You had to study his classics. So his doctrines, his teachings, his principles became the mainstream above anyone else. All the guys who momentarily ignored him or defeated him, because there was another school called a legalist school that Qin Shi Huangdi adopted, and Qin Shi Huangdi was in power for 11 years only. His son and grandson were puppets for another 2 years plus, so 13 years, during which time they tried to suppress Confucianism. But after these guys left, after Confucius, after Qin Shi Huangdi and his son and grandson were gone, Confucianism came back through the Han Dynasty, and the greatest or most powerful Han Emperor, Han Wudi, who had probably had the biggest kingdom in Chinese history in terms of land mass. He just about conquered every neighbor. He was so enraptured, so in love with Confucius' teachings that he gave this order: if any of my court officials at any rank ever come across a good Confucian scholar, he must report him to me personally and must immediately offer him a post so that we can secure this talent. And if any of my officials of whatever rank obstructs the work of a good Confucian scholar, or demotes him, or messes him around, or prevents him from achieving his objective, the penalty is death. So this is coming from the emperor. It's pretty serious stuff, right? So Confucian teaching became the order of the day. So, quick repetition again. What is the heart of his teaching? Lie. Because there's a contract between all of us and heaven. There's a contract, social contract, between all of us at different levels, from king to lords, lords to us, between ourselves, husband and wife, wife and children, husband and children, employer and servant. There's a contract, social contract, obligations going both ways. There's a contract between all living beings and nature, Mother Earth. We respect those contracts. We carry out or fulfill our obligations. The world will be in harmony. This is what heaven wanted. This is what we should do. We should never forget that. Lie comes first. Yi, righteousness. Whenever a human being has to make a difficult decision, then righteousness should come first in the balance, not self-interest. How, which is filial piety. Our parents gave us birth. When they are alive, we should respect them and care for them. When they are dead, we should remember them and honor them. How is so important. And then, of course, Ji, which is wisdom. Confucius' very strong emphasis that we should pass on wisdom. We should continue this tradition of wisdom and scholastic learning. There's Lai, there's Yi, there's Hao, there's Yan, which is to be benevolent, to treat everybody with respect and dignity, to share that love in a universal way. Now, his great-grand student down the track, Mencius Manji, who came along and had a fantastic exposition of what Confucius meant. He said, what Confucius meant was this: if we could extend the love we have for our parents to all aged people, old people, Confucius' teachings are in accord with what heaven wants, in accord with what nature needs, in accord with what a government should be. Confucius teaches us when we choose a king, then we should choose the most benevolent, the kindest, wisest person. And the person should remain kind and wise to discharge his duties. Anything else, we throw the equation out of balance. So it's not about a person's race or religious belief, his political creed, which party he belongs to, what tribe he comes from. Confucius wasn't interested in any of those. He was interested that we have the best and the brightest and the kindest people in power, and that these people care for the people who are less privileged. In fact, one example before I go, if you watch the movie on Confucius by Zhao Wenfat, the early scene shows a little slave boy. He was supposed to be buried. Part of the old days, the human sacrifice was a part of the Shang dynasty culture, and many people carried on through the Zhao dynasty against the law. So during Confucius' time, there was this lord, he died, all the slaves were buried together. The little boy ran out, didn't want to be buried. They shot an arrow, got him in the arm, he kept running. And Confucius' student, who was very good in the swordsmanship, took a sword out, defended him against the army, held him back. So finally they had to settle it. Confucius had to go to so-called parliament in those days and meet the general and the lord's family. And General Lord's family said, excuse me. He says, my lord, when he died, he expressly ordered all the slaves must be buried with him, irrespective of the age or whatever. I'm carrying out my lord's orders. Confucius says, do you not remember when Zhao Manwang came and started the Zhao dynasty? He says, human sacrifice is wrong, against the will of heaven. Human sacrifice is wrong. No arguments for that. There cannot be human sacrifice. So this general said, I don't care. Zhao Manwang was 500 years ago. My lord died. When he died, he wanted all the slaves to be buried. I am loyal to my lord. I am closest to my lord's desires and wishes, and I'll make sure it's carried out. And Confucius said, since you're closest to the Lord, you should be buried alive as well. If you are prepared to be buried alive, I give you this child. The general thought, it's not a very good idea. So, Confucius is not afraid of arms. He's not afraid how many people outnumber him. He's prepared to die, right? And he's got some pretty useful students around who could defend him anyway, who weren't afraid of dying anyway. So, recap, we're talking about a guy who carries on the tradition of excellence in terms of human values of Zhao Manwang, Zhao Mowang, Gyong Tai Kung, and so forth, and use them as positive exemplars to teach us. Really important. A lot of people still say to me, Sifu, Chinese education system, Confucian system is, sort of just repeat the classics, read. Sorry. He actually used that part of history before him, especially the positive part of history, as case studies. So he actually taught his students, okay, now this is the environment we find ourselves. The Duke does this, the law says this, these people are suffering this way. What would Zhao Manwang have said? What would Zhao Mowang have said? What happened during that time? How is it different? How do we reconcile it? Where do we go from here? This is called case study. Only in recent times, in the last 100 years or so, the best American law schools started teaching case study, and then business schools started teaching case study, and everybody said, wow, fantastic education system. Not like the Chinese. Sorry, Confucius had it 2,600 years ago. He actually used the history as case studies. We call it precedents in law. So we studied precedent cases. This is what he did. And he did it with this degree of clarity and definition that is unmatched. And he himself added to that huge body of knowledge by his own exemplary living, by his own teachings and passion, by his own cultivation. And apparently, something like 70 to 72 of his students qualified, passed through all those 6 subjects that he taught. And because he went on generation after generation, Confucian teachings became the heart of Chinese culture. Now, to the extent that there are any deficiencies or deviations, you can blame the later people. But from what I've studied about Confucius, he's right up there with the best of the very, very best. In his own lifestyle, in his teachings, in his wisdom, and in the expansive areas and subjects that he covered. Somebody who's brilliant in mathematics at the same time can be an extremely gifted archer, a charioteer who could be good in music, a guy who mastered all the rites, and yet he was there with calligraphic skills unmatched. Oh, calligraphic skills, hey, before I forget. At that time, nobody had a copy of his handwriting, but there's a guy called Beigon, who was a senior minister during the last Shang dynasty's rule, and when he died, the temple was erected for him, and subsequent kings and emperors came and left their calligraphic works on there. Confucius went up to this huge pillar, they call it a stele, like a concrete pillar, and he used a sword to write a dedicated poem to Bigan. And anybody who's seen that writing will tell you it's the work of a grandmaster, because to control the sword and cut through the concrete and write the characters so beautifully and strongly shows that Confucius was a master of swordsmanship. Confucius is not a weak scholar. He's a ambidextrous, multi-talented knight and scholar. It's just that he sought the way of peace. During his time, every duke was looking for some guy to teach him military strategy, or some brave knight to come and lead his army and fight as a general. Confucius says, there's plenty of war, plenty of civil war. My job is to do the opposite thing, to put an end to the wars. So he chose the path of peace. He could have sold his skills as military strategist, whatever he could. Didn't want to do that. Didn't want to do that. So in the future lectures, we will talk about his contemporary and equally illustrious, but a guy who chose a different path, Sun Ji. Sun Ji was a contemporary of Confucius. They lived during the same time, in the spring and autumn period. But he chose to use his wisdom to apply to military strategy. So we will talk about Sun Ji, and we will talk about a few other greats during the spring and autumn period and leading to the warring period. Okay? But for today, I think we've hopefully done justice to this great master, Confucius. Thank you very much. Was that good?
Few questions, Sifu.
Sure.
Okay. Confucius. Okay. Is there any relationship between Makji and Confucius?
No direct relationship.
Oh.
Yeah, no direct relationship. Although Makji, those of you who don't know, is one of the greats of all time as well. But I will also mention him. But he's almost forgotten now, unfortunately. He's very, very unique, very, very smart. He came after Confucius. And in many respects, he follows the same lineage as Zhao Manwang, Zhao Mo Wang. But the one thing that he did differently from Confucius was he believed that the poor, the oppressed, don't need education as much as they need protection. And Makji actually applied his great intelligence and wisdom and put his body on the line and defended them. He actually fought. So he actually put his body on the line. So he is also another truly great man. But all of them studied the King. And the things that Confucius say about the King and the things that Makji say about the King suggest that these people have a level of wisdom sort of, I think unmatched since, and probably will be unmatched for a long, long time. Okay? So yes, Makji is a very significant character. In fact, there was a movie made of his life, starring Andy Lau. It's quite a good movie, actually. Yeah, if you have a chance, you go, get a copy of that, right? So we'll be talking the other characters of the spring and autumn period, and then later, the Warring States period. Many, many great characters like Confucius, Lao Tzu, Makji, and Sun Ji, and many others, and others you might not have heard of. The great poet Wat Yun, and the great statesman Ji Sui. All these people Sifu will mention, but Confucius, I think, more than deserve his very, very special spot in history. Okay, thank you very much.